Kara, this is Doreen, are we all set to kick off?
We're still missing a few people, but we have our quorum here of CAC members, so I think we can go ahead and kick things off.
Yeah, I don't want to rush it. I just didn't quite gather how many we were missing.
Yes, I think we are missing, I might count 1, 2, 3, 4 CAC members.
And we know at least one had planned to be late, right?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. Well, I know we have a very full agenda for the day, so I will ask my co-chair Segos if you're okay to get started. I think we will.
Trying to get off mute. Yes, I'm good. Thank you.
Thank you. Great. Well, good afternoon, everyone. And this is Doreen Harris, Acting President and CEO of NYSERDA. Again, I'm pleased to be joined here by my co-chair, Commissioner Basil Segos, and welcome to the 4th meeting of the New York State Climate Action Council. It's great to see all of you again, and I hope you are remaining safe and well. Including those who are struggling with the lingering power outages from yesterday's storm. I know that has put a kink in some people's logistics for the day, and I hope all is restored soon, of course. We do have a full agenda for today's meeting, so as I said, I'd like to get right into it. I will start by reminding the council members of our meeting logistics and procedures. The first is to please remain on mute if you are not speaking. If you go to the next slide, please. So we can limit any background noise. A member of NYSERDA's IT team will also monitor members to ensure they're muted. And we would encourage all council members to join us on video to the extent possible. You can turn your video on by clicking the camera button on your computer screen. To ask questions or provide your thoughts, we are going to continue with the tradition of raising your hand using the hand icon on your screen. We'll be monitoring that to help us engage in discussion as the agenda allows. And as you know, you can get to that button by clicking the 3 dots on the bottom of your screen and the raise hand button within that visual. So we are anticipating a number of roll call votes during today's meeting, and we hope to work through the logistics of that process smoothly. We will call on members in alphabetical order and ask you to place your vote by saying aye or no during those roll calls. And I will note that as has been the case in the past, Karen Fusco of NYSERDA is available to help with any technical issues. Karen.fusco@nyserda.ny.gov is on standby. Thank you, Karen, as needed throughout the meeting. So again, let's begin by calling the roll to see which members of the council are in attendance today. I will ask NYSERDA's Valerie Milanovic to do this, and in alphabetical order, with members of the council saying here as your name is called. And if you are here attending as a designee for the head of a state agency, please state your name and note the commissioner you are representing, please. Val?
Thank you, Doreen. Good afternoon, council members and designees. I have a pretty good list of some designees, so hopefully we can get through this in short order. So I acknowledge the presence of Doreen Harris, co-chair Doreen Harris, co-chair Segos.
Present.
Brian Steinmuller on behalf of Commissioner Ball.
He is here.
Donna DeCarolis.
Here. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Ron Epstein on behalf of Commissioner Dominguez.
I'm present and good afternoon all.
Good afternoon to you. Gavin Donahue.
Present.
Dennis Elsenbeck.
Here.
CEO Thomas Falcone,
Present.
Kevin Hansen on behalf of Commissioner Gertler,
Afternoon.
I think I heard you. Rose Harvey,
Here.
Bob Howarth,
Present.
Peter Iwanowitz.
I'm present.
Next would be Chancellor Milagros on the off chance that he's here, but I believe he might be late. CEO Quinones,
Present.
Commissioner Reardon,
Here.
Ann Reynolds,
Present.
Sarah Osgood on behalf of Chair Rhodes, Keisha Santiago on behalf of Commissioner Rosado,
Present.
Mariah Selter,
Present, thank you.
Paul Shepson,
Present.
Rebecca Kepnick on behalf of Commissioner Wisniewskis,
I'm here. Good afternoon, everyone.
Gary Ginsberg on behalf of Commissioner Zucker,
Here.
and just circling back, I think I saw Sarah Osgood, but I couldn't hear her.
Valerie, can you hear me now?
I can hear you now, Sarah. Thank you.
Great.
With that, I note the presence of a quorum for today's Climate Action Council meeting.
Thank you, Val, and thank you, everyone, for attending again today. As I mentioned, we certainly do have a full agenda, as you can see on the slide in front of you. We will begin today's meeting with a few remarks from the co-chairs and really dive into what we hope will be a very productive and informative session through which each advisory panel chair, as well as the co-chairs of the Just Transition Working Group, will share their work plans. Council members are encouraged to ask questions and provide feedback on these work plans, which the panels and the Just Transition Working Group will take into account as they finalize their plans for posting in the near term on the climate.ny.gov website. We will then discuss how to best consider waste emissions in developing the scoping plan. And after we conclude that discussion, we will hear a series of presentations on New York's electricity system that I know many of you have had particular interest in. And then we will conclude the meeting with a few agency updates and next steps. So indeed, a full agenda, and again, thank you for joining us. Next slide, please. So as we commence the agenda, let's proceed with consideration of the minutes of the last meeting. Council members received the draft minutes with their meeting materials. Are there any discussion items on those minutes? Okay, hearing none, we can move to approve the minutes. Again, I will ask Valerie to call the names of each of the council members. When you hear your name, please signify that you either approve of the minutes by saying aye, or you disapprove of the minutes by saying no. Valerie?
Thank you, Doreen. Co-Chair Harris,
Aye.
Co-Chair Sagos,
Aye.
Brian Steinmuller.
This is actually Richard Ball.
Oh, hi, Commissioner Ball.
Hi, and hi and I.
Excellent, thank you. Donna DeCarolis,
Aye.
Ron Epstein,
Aye.
Gavin Donahue,
Aye.
Dennis Elsenbeck,
Aye.
CEO Falcone,
Aye.
Kevin Hansen, Kevin Hansen. I can circle back. Harvey,
Aye.
Bob Howard,
Aye.
Peter Iwanowitz.
Aye.
On the off chance Chancellor Malatros has arrived. CEO Quinones,
Aye.
Commissioner Reardon,
Aye.
Ann Reynolds,
Aye.
Sarah Osgood, Commissioner Rosado. Oh, I'm sorry, Keisha Santiago. Keisha?
Aye. Did you
Oh,
hear me?
thank you.
Oh, great, thanks.
Kaya Salter,
Aye.
Paul Shepson,
Aye.
Rebecca Kepnick,
Aye.
Barry Ginsburg,
Aye.
and circling back once again, Sarah, I think I saw you again for a fleeting moment, but I didn't actually hear you. I think I hear you now.
Give me that time.
I did get you that time. Thank you, everyone. With that, the minutes are approved.
Thank you, Val. The minutes are adopted and will be posted to the Climate Action Council's website. Thank you all. Next slide, please. I'll turn the floor over to my co-chair, Commissioner Segas, for some introductory remarks.
Hi, Doreen, and hello, everybody.
Hello.
Good to see you all. Certainly continues to be a very busy year on the climate front on our side, and obviously nationally with a very good and robust conversation going on climate issues right now. Next slide, please. So this is maybe a little bit of a parochial slide for me, but just to bring attention to what some of the agencies are up to. We are all of us pulling on all cylinders, whether it's COVID or the climate crisis. And we are now in our third crew of forest rangers and staff that we have fighting fires in the West, from the Dakotas all the way through Colorado and California and Oregon. We have a crew out there right now. I just sent some photos out this morning of some of their work. An incredible year, incredibly tragic year with fires in the West that science believes is caused by climate change. We agree. Nonetheless, we're out there busy on the front lines and gaining a lot of knowledge and bringing that back to New York, which is really important. Next slide, please. In and around Climate Week, DEC released our new standards, our regulations to cut HFCs, these super pollutants, focusing in on largely on the HFCs that are part of the air conditioning equipment, refrigeration equipment, looking to phase that out over time. And over the next few years, these rules we expect are going to have make a significant dent in our overall emissions as a state, equivalent to, I think, 17 million metric tons of CO2 emissions. So we're proud of the work we did with many states as the federal government pulled out of the business of regulating these chemicals, these compounds. The states, New York and the U.S. Climate Alliance banded together and coordinated on these regulations. So we're proud to have that out now on the street. And that also complements what NYSERDA is doing to challenge New York as an innovator, bring some of those new technologies in HFC alternatives for HVAC to market, develop them, bring them to market. So Doreen can mention some of that. Next slide, please. And then I'll turn it back to Doreen for Climate Week. We really did have a very robust Climate Week this year with many agencies, from those that are here on the phone and on Zoom, all the way through to DFS, which did some amazing work on the insurance industry. But Doreen?
Great, thank you. And indeed, under Governor Cuomo's leadership, we certainly did continue to show tremendous climate and clean energy progress, and Climate Week was a great example of that. As Commissioner Segos just indicated, we don't need to go into detail, but I think suffice it to say that many of us in this meeting participated in what was an incredible series of events around Climate Week. And so I think it's important to note a couple of noteworthy accomplishments of particular relevance here to the Climate Action Council. The first is that NYSERDA did launch a $50 million Empire Building Challenge during Climate Week, which we believe is a really exciting push to advance deep efficiency and electrification in large commercial buildings, which is obviously a very significant challenge of our state in achieving our climate goals. I also had the pleasure of joining Lieutenant Governor Kathy Hochul at an event with respect to our very first community solar and storage project in Westchester County, with many more in the pipeline. Another really exciting event. And I agree with respect to the HFC regulations that Basil just spoke to. NYSERDA had a very complementary effort with the HVAC challenge as a really good example of how agencies can work together to bring forth greater value because of our collaboration. In addition, it was of particular importance for me to be able to partner with Superintendent Linda Lacewell and Nina Chen and our colleagues at the Department of Financial Services on a new MOU to work together on accelerating the low carbon transition. Particularly with respect to working on climate risk and solutions for financial institutions. Again, another expansion of our work as a state. I know President Quinones and the New York Power Authority made very good progress during Climate Week on the first Evolve New York high-speed EV charging hub, and the Port Authority rolled out a new clean construction program, picking up on the power of choosing to buy clean for state infrastructure. And I know you, Basil, had the opportunity to present on the certification of 14 new climate smart communities during Climate Week. And more recently, NYSERDA launched a as part of the Workforce Development Awareness Week, a new round of our Career Pathways Training Partnerships program, which was $8.5 million in workforce development, serving priority populations and disadvantaged communities. So a lot of very good progress being made in just 1 week. If there's other initiatives to highlight, we certainly should bring them up in the context of this meeting, but it's generally great to see the progress that we're making together, and very appreciative of your continued partnership in doing so. So next slide, please. I'd like to turn it back to Commissioner Segos, who has the enviable task of working through the report outs from the advisory panels and the working groups, the substance of today's meeting. Commissioner, over to you.
Thank you, Doreen. Enviable indeed. So as you all know, many of you have been sitting in on these meetings. Our panels are now fully impaneled and meeting, which is fantastic. Some have even had second meetings. So what I want to do right now, they've been working on their scope and on their work plan. I want to spend the next 70 minutes, and I'm going to hold us to that 70 minutes, going through each of the 7 panels. And I have a timer here. It's going to be a 10-minute timer. I hate to be so prescriptive, but we have a lot to get through, and I want each chair to spend no more than 10 minutes both presenting and then fielding some Q&A. If there are issues that we don't get to, we can get to it offline, but if we spend too much time on any one of these panels, we could spend hours on any one of these. So let's do this as efficiently as possible, and let's hear from all the chairs as to their incredibly hard work and the work of their panel members. So, all right, next slide, please, and we'll start with Chair Richard Ball. Take it away, Richard.
Thank you so much. Commissioner. And can we have the first slide, please? Next slide. There we go. Thank you so much. The Agriculture and Forestry panel is made up of 18 experts in the field of agriculture and forestry. We have met twice. There is a very diverse set of expertise that includes farmers, foresters, academic researchers, and professors, policy experts, and conservation professionals. They are not timid and shy in any sense of the word. The Ag and Forestry Work Plan was developed with extensive input from the panel, a lot of emails as well. The panel encompasses multiple economic sectors, and as such, the work plan contains multiple goals, including greenhouse gas emission reduction goals, carbon sequestration goals, goals to ensure the benefits provided by well-managed agriculture and forestry resources are maintained and enhanced in New York State, and a fourth goal that captures the global greenhouse gas emission reduction potential by submitting New York State, I should say substituting New York State grown and produced products for imported fossil fuel intensive products. The following few slides outline the major topic areas that the panel determined were important to meet our work plan goals. And I'm going to cover these topics quickly in the interest of time and look for questions later. As you can see, land use conversions, including the protection and succession of forest and farmland, forestry and forest management on both private and public forest lands. Next slide, please. Thank you. Continuing with forest and forest management, afforestation and reforestation on available lands, including farmland, livestock management for methane emission reduction, consisting of both feed management to reduce enteric fermentation, and also manure management to reduce methane from manure storages. Agricultural soil management for nitrous oxide reductions on cropland and for carbon sequestration through regenerative soil health related practices. Next slide, please. Cross-cutting issues here, cost and innovative financing options, government and private incentives to support practice adoption and transitions, supporting New York's bioeconomy, or as I mentioned above, substitutions of agriculture and forestry products for those fossil fuel intensive products like biofuels, bioplastics is what we're thinking here. Local real property tax impacts to the land protection and conversion goals. Also carbon pricing and markets and expansion of markets for forest and agricultural products. Next slide, please. Cross-sector issues that we're going to be deliberating with other panels here. Energy emissions, by that electricity and fuel use in this sector, including biofuels and beneficial electrification on farms and forest businesses. Power generation, transportation, energy efficiency, and housing panels as well. Energy production and distribution. We're talking about the electricity and fuel use in this sector, including bioenergy, biofuels, and other biomass-based feedstocks. That will be with the power generation panel. Renewable energy siting, biofuel and biomass production and emission, food waste and waste-based fuel production, land use, adoption and resilience, and wetland emissions and sequestration capacity. Next slide, please. This is a little bit about our timeline for the panel, outlining our meetings, including planned topics, public engagement, and planned discussions with other panels. I think it's self-explanatory. And last slide, please. This contains our panel's external engagement plan, including topics for discussion with external experts in the fields of agriculture and forestry, as well as plans to engage with the public on panel goals and recommendations. We've had a number of excellent presentations, and the panel has highlighted a few things they'd like to learn about, and so we're going to continue on that path. Commissioner, thank you.
Okay, Richard, that was blazing fast. We have 5 minutes and 15 seconds for Q&A. Open that up.
Sorry, this is Peter Arwanowitz. I can't seem to find a place to raise my hand, but I'd like to ask a question.
Please, Peter. Yep.
So you mentioned, Commissioner Ball, that you have a greenhouse gas emissions reduction target. What is the target for the agricultural sector?
We're looking at a total of 15% by 2030, 30% by 2050, and combining that with our sequestration goals, that will bring us to net zero or below.
Okay, just want to comment. It seems off the top 30% by 2050. It seems inconsistent with the statute.
I think this is based on a carbon sequestration study and experts at Cornell University, along with what's already being done. And again, an important part of our getting to net zero is the sequestration possibilities in both agriculture and forestry.
Yeah, I think the only sector where net zero really applies is energy generation, but be looking forward to more on this, I guess, in the future.
Sure. Thank you, Peter.
Any other questions for Richard?
Basil, I see Bob has his hand raised.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that summary. I wanted to just raise the issue of biofuels and how that will be handled. As you probably know, there's a lot of debate still about the magnitude of overall emissions from biofuels. It depends on whether you include inadvertent land use changes or not. I chaired a commission for the International Council of Science on that going back a decade ago, and our conclusion was that biofuels should have at most a very, very limited role in any sort of energy future. So I'm wondering what sort of expertise you're bringing into that discussion.
Well, we would certainly welcome your suggestions here. This was, again, in our work plan and scope of work. We're looking at topics and things that we need to put on the agenda to discuss further and dive into those details. So we would certainly welcome your suggestion there, Bob.
Okay, thank you.
I think we have Donna.
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. I had a similar question, but a little bit different than Bob's, and that is, I was curious. So here, for example, on slide 17, we talk about renewable natural gas. And on an earlier slide, I think it might have been 15, the commissioner talked about where the crossover between this and other panel work would occur. How do you decide where the crossover is? Because I wondered if there couldn't also be a crossover for the energy efficiency and housing panel relative to renewable natural gas. As an example, we operate a utility system, and there are many developers interested in tying into our system, for example. Thank you.
Great suggestion. Yeah, great suggestion.
Thank you.
Okay, I don't see any other hands up. That was pretty quick. Good. So we'll put a minute back into the bank.
I'll take it.
Thank you, Richard. Good job.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, panel. All right, moving on. Next slide, please. This will be land use and local government with Sarah Crowell from the Department of State. Sarah.
Thank you, Commissioner, and thank you all for having me here today to make this update. Can I have the first slide, please? I'm mindful of time. I want to get into this. So the land use and local government panel has met a couple of times so far. Our last meeting was actually just yesterday. And our 11 panel members really bring it's a really diverse panel with a lot of expertise. They're really engaged and committed, and I really look forward to working with them. But as represented on this slide, we anticipate a broad range of issues through looking at these issues through the land use and local government lens. And I just want to point out, because local government is in a position really to provide the scaffolding that facilitates reaching the measurable goals that are going to be set by other panels. The recommendations that are going to come out of this panel may respond to that broad range of sectors, and there are really a lot of opportunities, as you can see on that. You can see pretty much at every point for collaboration and consultation with other panels. So as shown on this slide, the general topic areas that our panel will address include promotion of land development patterns such as smart growth, transit-oriented design, and other techniques that can reduce dependence on cars and reduce VMTs. Policies and programs that create connections to allow non-motorized transportation, such as trails that connect residential areas to employment hubs, complete streets that make cycling safe and comfortable alternative to driving, and other programs and infrastructure such as that. Maximizing potential for carbon sequestration in both urban and rural areas, and that would be through techniques such as appropriate land use regulations, urban reforestation, green infrastructure, parks and agriculture, urban food, urban gardens, other things like that. In addition, planning and zoning that will allow for and encourage appropriate siting of both rooftop, on-site, and ground-mounted, standalone solar and wind at a whole variety of scales. We also want to look at at local codes and other regulatory measures and programs to require and incentivize energy efficient development. We're looking for opportunities to reduce barriers to clean energy adoption through programs such as community choice aggregation, opt-out community distributed generation, and other programs along those lines. We want to also explore a whole suite of opportunities for local government to reduce its own energy use and to take a leadership role in modeling and supporting similar measures by their residents, their property owners, and other stakeholders. And finally, our panel will be taking the lead in creating a comprehensive set of recommendations for resilience and adaptation to climate change. And to fully address this issue, we'll be working with designated members from each of the panels. So it'll be a full panel. All the panels will be participating in the coming weeks to compile a comprehensive set of recommendations just across all sectors. So we'll receive input and we'll put those together. And I just want to mention it's across all of these issues, our panel is very committed to addressing equity, and we'll be looking at developing recommendations through that lens. Can I have the next slide, please? So as you can see, our schedule is packed. Our meeting timeline really represents the accelerated schedule of the overall process. We'll have we anticipate monthly meetings of the full panel through the end of this process. I think all the panels are sort of looking at that same schedule. We're also planning additional meetings and consultations with other panels. We want to bring in local government officials and engage with other stakeholders throughout the process. Can I have the next slide, please? Thank you. And finally, external engagement. This is particularly important for our panel. We have we have quite a charge ahead of us. In addition to meeting with members of other panels, we're in the midst of coordinating engagement with external stakeholders. So as I said, we have a really impressive panel of experts who come with a diverse cross-section of expertise, but and they've worked with numerous communities, they've worked with local officials to both plan and implement climate resilience strategies and other related actions. But our panel also recognizes the importance of calling in other experts. As I said, this is a really broad scope, and we want to ensure that we're developing a really robust list of recommendations to this council for your consideration that is not only aspirational, but also really is realistic and can be implemented on the ground. So on our list of experts that we want to engage include local officials who represent sort of the diversity of New York communities throughout the state. We want to make sure that the voices of officials at the village, town, city, and county level all have the opportunity to share their challenges, their opportunities, and their strategies with the panel. And we want to engage them in coordinating so we're going to coordinate specific roundtable meetings that focus just on that, with that group. There's really no one-size-fits-all approach in our communities. What works in a rural setting may not apply in a city. And with that diversity of voices and experiences, that's really critical to the success of our recommendations. So we're working on finalizing that list now of government officials to engage, and I'd be really glad to hear any recommendations from this council. So feel free to email me, and if you have any recommendations. So in addition to that roundtable, we also are going to solicit broad feedback, and we're planning to have from the public. We're planning to have at least one virtual public forum that will allow members of the public to comment and provide recommendations to us. And lastly, we're going to develop we've created an email address, which you can see here, that we will allow, we're going to use to invite the public to submit emails, to contact us by email, to provide their thoughts, their recommendations throughout the process. And as I said, we recognize that there are many issues. So finally, I just want to say we will be engaging sort of a range of experts to try to get this right throughout the process. So this is where we are so far. And we're still working on that full range of who we need to consult with. So that's it. That's where we are. We got a lot ahead of us, and thank you for your time and commitment to this. And I'm left for questions.
Sarah, thanks very much. We do have a couple questions, it looks like, but let me just ask you, should folks email you at your own email or at the LULG@DOS email that you put up?
You know what? If it's recommendation, I get both, but my own email is probably more direct, which is I don't have it on a slide, but it's sarah.crowell@dos.ny.gov.
Great. Okay. Thanks. Bob, I saw you first. We have about, just FYI, minute 45 left. Okay.
Let me try to be brief. Sarah, you mentioned code issues. Let me just bring up an issue. If we look at the overall greenhouse gas emissions from the state, use of fossil fuels in home and commercial heating is really probably the biggest single driver. And I personally favor the idea of changes in our building codes so that we don't allow fossil fuels in new construction. I've been promoting that for a couple of years, and sometimes local governments tell me, oh, that's a state issue. We can't deal with building codes like that. State people say, oh, code changes like that have to happen at the local area. So I would ask that your panel clarify where leadership from that should come from and how we work out this local versus state leadership and in changing what I think is a necessary change in the code. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you. Absolutely. And we'll be working closely with the Energy Efficiency and Housing panel on that issue.
Great. Thanks, Bob. Next, we have Dennis.
Thank you, Basil. So part of what we need to look at on smart growth, I think that's a key piece of this, is really starting to align smart growth with utility planning. Right now, they're on separate paths. One governed by state legislation, the other governed by the regulatory process. So part of this, what I would suggest is to seek input from local regional economic development councils and economic development agencies so that we actually are aligning our preferred sites or the preferred sites from a community point of view with their marketing, as well as Rust Belt neighborhoods. And I also would suggest we start to consider the impact of decarbonization in terms of local capacity and how utilities will project infrastructure investment, because this could really enhance the value, the feeder value, as well as present new non-wires alternatives, opportunities that can be actually forward thinking. So that's how I would do it. Thank you.
Dennis, thanks. And I'll take some of Richard's time and apply it to this panel here. Good point there. Right?
Actually, because
And Basil, I actually had something I wanted to go on the record with quickly about the previous panel.
Okay.
If that's all right. I realized I was drinking my tea and I just wanted to go on the record with natural gas is, a fossil fuel and would not qualify as a renewable fuel pursuant to the CLCPA, renewable or not. So I had wanted to go on. I realized I hadn't wanted for the ag panel to sort of hear that comment, but I won't go back again. I apologize for that. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Any other questions? I don't see any other hands, so I think we'll go on. Thank you, Sarah. And I'll just note that John Rhodes has joined us. John, do you want to give us a quick mic check?
Can you hear me?
We can. Thank you.
Work?
It works.
Good, thank you.
All right.
Basil, we were also joined by Eric Gertler.
Okay.
In the meantime, Eric, are you on?
I'm on as well. Can you hear me?
Yep.
While we're checking, Jim, did you join? I see you on here. Chancellor?
Here. I'm here.
Yeah. All right, man. Thank you.
Hey, Basil, I had my hand raised, but I'm not sure if you can see it.
Okay. Sorry, Peter. Yeah, go ahead.
Quick comment, and it's something I mentioned in August, and I think it's a real shortcoming not to actually have representatives from local governments on this panel, and I really hope we can fix that. I know you're going to have a roundtable, but I just don't think that's sufficient.
Sarah, before we move on, do you want to just address that and how you just reiterate how the roundtable might help us on a more equitable basis statewide?
I'm trying to. Oh, shoot. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. You can hear me now? My thing says, I'm sorry.
We hear you.
Okay, sorry, my mute wasn't unmuting. I'm sorry, the question was how we will, I'm sorry, I got distracted by the mute button. Can you repeat that?
It wasn't so much of a question, Sarah. It was just a concern. This is Peter Iwanowitz, and I continue to be concerned that we don't actually have formal representation as a member of this panel from the local government sector. I understand the roundtable and the outreach that's going to be going on there, but I think we have an opportunity to bring in somebody from the trade associations representing towns, cities, and counties. It would be worth us putting somebody on the panel from all those perspectives.
I mean, we, as I said, we're developing, and the roundtable will, will include sort of a broad range of representation from a lot of different municipalities, and we're really looking forward to bringing that expertise in. I agree there's a lot of, there's a lot that we need to consider and we need to be aware of during this process. And we certainly can also arrange to, have, as I said, we want to have stakeholder meetings and consultations, and I think that those trade groups may be certainly valuable for valuable resources to the panel. As far as the panel structure goes, that's not really within my my purview to create, but we really do, we've got a great group, and we are planning to engage quite a number of stakeholders, and would be more than open to any, would love any of your recommendations, specific recommendations as to who we should engage.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for raising the point, Peter. I've broken my own rule here. It's strayed. So if it's okay, I'd like to move on. Next slide, please.
Okay. Good afternoon. This is Janet Joseph here, the Senior Vice President at NYSERDA. I'm going to be presenting today on behalf of Commissioner Wisnaskis. Just doing a sound check. Can you hear me clearly, Commissioner?
We hear you. The slide has not advanced, though.
Just checking, Basil, I think your connectivity might be a little low. Your video's coming in and out, so Janet, we'll just advance at one slide and you can carry on.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. So this Energy Efficiency and Housing Advisory Panel is focusing on activities and strategies that can drive decarbonization in buildings across New York State. So we are looking at single family, multifamily, commercial, institutional, all buildings across the state, both new construction and existing buildings. And you could see the level of emission reduction that we are targeting consistent with the CLCPA. We have a number of topics that we will be covering as a group. And I will note that we have a very good representation from private sector, from the public sector, from community groups, solution providers across the different building sectors. So we will certainly, as a strategy, be looking at ways to reduce the demand, energy demand in buildings, so adoption of an efficient building shell. We'll also be looking at operational issues and behavioral measures that can reduce energy demand. Codes and standards are a very significant lever to drive decarbonization in buildings, and there is quite a strong nexus with the work that we just heard about from Sarah with the land use and local government team, and we look forward to coordination there. Electrification of buildings is a critical pillar in the decarbonization for buildings, and we will be digging into the topics to drive electrification across New York State, and we'll be looking at the related grid impacts associated with this, and also I note a point of coordination with the power generation group. We will be exploring where there might be targeted applications where low carbon fuels or bioenergy could be necessary to meet the needs of a particular building sector. Again, a note of coordination with the ag and forestry team. Looking at the ability to connect with the grid will be a significant point of work for this team as well, and identifying strategies that can further build out our use of solar on rooftops, in addition to community solar and large-scale solar, which the other teams will be delving. Next slide, please. So there are a number of cross-cutting topics that we will be digging into. One of the most notable is around resilience, looking at ways to make our buildings more resilient. When we think about buildings, we have to think about construction, and that gets into and raises issues of embodied carbon. So if we can make some progress in understanding that and reducing embodied carbon, we will identify those areas. Identifying both the opportunities for workforce development and the labor needs associated with decarbonizing strategies will be a critical part of the work of this team. And as we look through the different strategies and approaches, we will need to be considering the impacts from a number of different vantage points. We need to be considering the impacts to the property owners, to the building operators, to tenants, and importantly to the residents, and importantly considering issues associated with affordability and impacts to disadvantaged communities. And there's a significant point of coordination there with a few of the other teams on that point. We will need to pay attention to cost reduction. We will need to identify ways to reduce the total cost of these measures for New Yorkers, and that will be another area of work for the team. Lastly, we've had some discussion about the need to get the metrics right. Establishing the method and the metric to evaluate building performance can be a little bit tricky. It's not as easy as just measuring kilowatt hours, but it's really important to understanding and assessing progress. So that's kind of a quick view on the scope. If you could move on to the next slide, please. In terms of some of the critical milestones that we have established, in October, we're really focusing on getting the work plan solidified, kicking off some of the subgroups, and we have established subgroups for the single family sector, multifamily sector, and commercial and institutional. And we're also focusing in October on kind of level setting and sharing information, local resources, and identifying the barriers that we see in the industry and in the marketplace. Now, as we move to November, we will start identifying the solution set and the specific strategies and policies that we should be considering. Kind of moving forward, we in December will need to start sizing the impacts from these different strategies, and we will need to start prioritizing based on criteria that have been established. And these criteria are important, and that is around the greenhouse gas impact, around the other benefits of the measure, around what we know about cost, around the impact to disadvantaged communities, and importantly, the practicality of the measure and the ability to successfully implement it. So as we look to the Q1 of 2021, we will really be refining the quantification around these different policies. We will be refining the implementation issues around these different policies, and we will continue to be engaging with the other groups where there is a nexus as identified in this slide. If you could move on to the next slide. So a couple of points on the external engagement. So we have also established an email address where interested parties can submit suggestions, so call your attention to that. I mentioned earlier that we've established 3 subgroups. The subgroups will be meeting on a regular basis and will be bringing in experts, external stakeholders, and market participants on topical areas to inform the deliberations of the subgroups. We also will do a quick survey in our information gathering period in October to get some external input on foundational resources and some potential mitigation strategies, policies, and actions that the panel and the subgroups should be considering in their deliberations. And in January, we will be hosting a public engagement meeting to solicit input on strategies and recommendations that are surfacing from the work of the panel and the subgroups. So that's a quick summary, and I can stop there and take questions if we have time.
Great. Just double checking, Basil, I think you're on mute. Are you okay? Are you able
to?
Can you hear me? Yep, now I can hear you.
My screen is going in and out.
Oh, are you okay to carry on? Because I've been keeping track of time, Basil. We have 2 minutes for questions on your behalf here. And it looks like we have Donna, Paul, Bob, and Dennis all in line.
But Doreen, I have a 2-minute question.
Uh-oh.
I'm kidding. I don't. I withdraw my 2-minute question.
Why don't we start with Donna? They're going to have to be very quick. And Basil, please pick up whenever you're able.
And I'll be quick because my question wasn't even first, so thank you. I really, Janet, nice to see you. And I really wondered, how are we going to assess cost impacts on consumers, small businesses, and industry? And I know you touched on it. How will that be evaluated? How will we then prioritize what sorts of pathways make sense? Thank you.
Yeah. So I'll try to address that quickly. Certainly, we will, to the extent the information is available, pull together the information on costs and the potential impacts. I think this will be a bit of an iterative piece of work, Donna, starting first with some qualitative assessments of cost and then getting more granular as we have more clarity around the shape and the form of the particular policy and strategy that's advanced. I know this is a very important topic for the Climate Action Council, and we are going to have to work together across all of the panels to understand the costs and the benefits.
Thanks, Janet.
Great. Let's go to Paul. I'm trying to go to a couple folks that we haven't heard as much from quite yet. Paul?
Okay, quickly, Janet, that was an impressive brief summary. I see that, of course, electrification of heating and hot water is an important part of the strategy. I'm wondering to what extent the panel is considering assessment and mitigation of natural gas leaks that could be an important component of the total greenhouse gas emission.
So there's awareness amongst the panel as this is an issue. We have not yet scoped out, how to best approach that analytically.
Okay, and looking at the clock, I'm very sorry, but I think just time for one more question. And Janet, I'm sure you're available separately for others, but I guess I'll just pick Dennis, who's on top of my list here. Dennis?
Thank you. It's always good to be on the top at some point. So Janet, I appreciate the update. I really appreciate your mention the connectivity to the utility grid. You had mentioned that you're looking at measuring kilowatt hours. My recommendation is really to measure kilowatts, which is demand. Demand is really what sets infrastructure investment predominantly. So really keep track of the practices or your assessment, but look at what the impact is going to be on the demand on the system, more so than just the kilowatt hours.
Yeah, and thank you, Dennis. Let me clarify the point I was making about the metric is it's not as simple as just measuring kilowatt hours for buildings. There are several metrics that we have to keep track of. So point well taken.
Great. Sorry, Paul and Raya, but we do have to carry on. Basil would be disappointed in me. So
I am. I logged in. I don't know if you can see me. I logged in through a different phone. Okay.
Yep. So maybe we go to the next slide, and Basil, you want to take over?
Sure. And then I'll kick it over to Marie-Trace. Is she back yet, or do we have Ron?
Sorry, you're stuck with Ron.
Okay, Ron, take it away.
How are you, sir?
Good.
First of all, on behalf of Commissioner Dominguez, it's our pleasure to present to you basically where we are in our work plan. I can't tell you how impressed we are with the advisory panel members. They're certainly enthusiastic, they're energetic, and they are creative and full of ideas. We have spent a considerable amount of time discussing the panel objectives, as well as working to develop a scope of work and identifying those areas where we overlap with other advisory panels and working groups. And those deliberations have made it very clear to us that additional work is definitely needed to inform and balance the goals of electrification with other alternatives such as renewable energy sources where they're practical and feasible. And I do expect that our panel will continue to spend considerable amount of time assessing those strategies along these lines. Some of the things that have been brought up, they include, I want to be very clear that we're not limiting any discussion, but we're looking at incentives such as pricing and rate design in terms of electricity, the supportive infrastructure that's required for both electrification and renewable energy sources. And also we need to collaborate on the impacts to the workforce and workforce development issues, because this will be a substantial change in terms of the current role of carbon use in transportation as we know it today. Other critical aspects of our work plan will be to assess the role of market-based policies and strategies to help achieve the CLCPA goals. And again, these may include, but they're certainly not limited to assessing cap and trade, looking at congestion pricing in other areas outside of New York City, assessing low carbon fuel standards and other strategies that the panel members bring forth. We also recognize that market-based strategies need to be considered in the context of other policies that take into account and recognize environmental justice impacts. Rounding out the scope of work, we'll also be assessing enhancements to existing public transportation services, but looking beyond just public transportation as we know it today. We need to look at complementary mobility services such as mobility on demand, micro transit, and as well as last mile intermodality. And that last mile intermodality is a significant issue that we will be struggling with, because we need to figure out how to consider that within the context of smart growth and land use policies. How do we optimize the system to take advantage of strategic growth that allows us to build out a system that reduces the number of trips by automobile and other vehicles? The panel members also specifically recognize that we have to make freight more efficient. And that also ties into the land use aspect in terms of where do you locate warehouses, other facilities that support last mile delivery? How do you look at the centralization of freight and delivery of goods so that you can mitigate greenhouse gas emissions? And obviously, as we look at these items and the scope of work, we also need to consider this in the context of resilience and also the adaptation of not only the carrier delivery structure, but also the modal specific infrastructure that's necessary to support alternatives to our current carbon structure. And of course, we would be remiss if we didn't recognize that you need to look through the lens of funding and finance strategies as well. So what can be brought to the table to help incentivize the strategies that come out, the recommendations that come out of the panel work, so that not only are they achieving the goals that are set forth, but that they're actionable and can be implementable. Next slide, please. So as detailed here, like many of my colleagues around the table, we have established a very aggressive schedule for which to finalize our recommendations for review by the council by the early spring of 2021. The schedule presented here for your consideration, it does incorporate opportunities for engagement with the public. For the panel to work with other working groups and other panels and receive input from expert witnesses and stakeholders. Next slide, please. The final slide, there it is. Final slide is our recommendation for external engagement. Sorry, I'm just going to hang up on that. Sorry about that. The advisory panel, like I said, is going to provide opportunities for public engagement, external engagement through open meetings. We have established a mailbox, which the address is presented here on this slide, where we can accept written questions and or comments. And then also we will hold specific forums that will allow us to hear input from both the public and those interested stakeholders. That is our presentation today. I welcome any questions from the co-chairs or that the council members may have. And thank you for this opportunity to present this on behalf of Commissioner Dominguez.
Ron, it sounds like you've got external engagement starting already.
Always.
Yeah.
Never a dull moment. I apologize for the phone.
That's all right. That's right. I think Raya's got a question for you.
So from having my hand up before, apologies.
Okay.
I will yield my time.
I don't see any other hands. Oh, Peter's got a hand. Peter?
Actually, it looks like Rose Harvey had a hand up too. So since I've spoken before, I'll see that slot to her and go after her.
Gentlemen. Rose?
Thank you. This is really goes back to all of the panels and the working groups, but particularly with transportation. As we look at all of this, and Ron, you mentioned it over and over again, you're going to also look at the costing and the pricing and the impact, both to government, but also consumers. But it just reminds me on all of these panels, as I mean, the land use panel, when they think about policy, as we're developing that, to have someone always looking at just the range of what the cost would be, because some of them will be affordable, some will not be affordable. So it's just check, a ground check to think about the costing at all ends and all levels all throughout.
Appreciate that. Thank you. And I hope you're well, Commissioner.
And nice to see you, Ron.
Thank you.
Peter?
Just a couple of quick comments. One, I hope we can have a recommendation out of this panel sooner rather than later that New York State should be continuing its alliance with California. They've made a bold commitment to adopt regulations to get 100% EVs by 2035, and I think New York State should do the same thing. I think it will also encourage us to move away from some of those near-term choices that are out there, like a low-carbon fuel standard that really could perpetuate combustion of fossil fuels. I think we really need to move away from that concept, to be honest, and move towards full electrification as fast as possible, and to be engaging the public with making that type of a commitment on California sooner rather than later, so that the public understands where the transportation sector needs to go to transition entirely off of fossil fuels. And then last but not least, I just recommend that the transportation panel really look at the recent statement from the Climate Justice Alliance, which is a national group that talks about market-based strategies. Their statement that came out earlier this week and was reported in Politico. It's really important reading from those groups that are on the front lines of the climate crisis and their perspective on market-based strategies like the TCI.
Thank you. And I can tell you that we've actually had some of those conversations, and I expect that we will see some more of this come through during our deliberations.
I'm glad to hear that. Thanks.
Thank you, everyone. Okay, Ron, thank you very much. Thanks to you.
Thank you. Be safe and well.
You as well. Next slide, please. Okay, turn over to John Rhodes. John?
Thanks, Basil. Thanks all for giving me your attention. I'm John Rhodes. I'm the chair of the Power Generation Panel. Next slide, please. So the first job is to give you a sense of the topics that we want to engage on. There's 11 or so on this page. There are 11 or so on the following page. I won't go through them each, but they're all important. They're all a little bit familiar friends. And in my mind, they come into, they probably clump into about 4 different topics. There's a set of topics around resource mix, like which new resources do we need to come up? Which old resources do we need to come down? And how do we kind of get resources into the mix that can provide flexibility, which is going to be a big theme of our panel. There's a series of topics around the issue of equity. Equity coming in and access flavor, access to the clean energy solutions that every New Yorker should have access to the clean energy economy, i.e. new kinds of jobs that every New Yorker should have access to, but alongside access, affordability, because one of the major equity issues is the fact of energy burden that too many of our New Yorkers face. A third bundle is solutions for the future, things we know we need but don't have yet, whether they're technology, some battery storage that's coming down the pike, or kind of policy ideas like carbon pricing and other ways of spurring the right kind of innovation and investment. And finally, barriers, things that we already know are making our transition tough, whether they're at the bulk, i.e. big facility level like siting, or whether they're at the distributed level where it's kind of interconnecting your solar installation up to the electric grid. We also, I think we all panels have this feature. We've got a lot of interactions that we need to have. And maybe you can skip forward to the next slide while I ramble a bit. But we know we have issues of siting and land use and site reuse, which go naturally to interaction with local government land use and ag and forests. We've got electrification of buildings, which go to the energy efficiency in buildings, and we got electrification of transportation, which obviously goes to the transportation. We've got our whole clean jobs agenda, which I've already mentioned, which calls for close work with the Just Transition Working Group, where I've drafted to be a member, and then throughout with many different colleague panels, sister panels, we've got issues of resilience, we've got issues of climate justice, and we've already seen a crop up a couple of times of natural gas transition. So that's our agenda. It sounds like it's a lot. We prefer to think that it's rich, and we're eager to get onto it. Let me just sort of say that we do, like the others, we have a great panel that I absolutely am confident can pull off this work. You know, it's very thoughtful, it's a group of people very knowledgeable, very engaged, and above all, not shy. So I'm looking forward to this work with these colleagues. Next slide, please. We're just going to be working hard throughout. We've got monthly meetings scheduled through the spring. There are a couple of months where we've actually got 2 meetings, and we're also probably forming up into subgroups in order to get more of the work done in a focused and a directed way. Next slide, please. External interactions is going to be a really important topic for us. Of course, we're going to need to get public engagement. The plus and minus of the power gen topics is that this is a set of issues that have already been out, it's been out in the public domain, so there's well-formed, well-articulated thinking on all sides. So we ought to harvest that. Our inclination is to both get public input early so that we get the agenda right and we're hitting the right issues, and late so that we can get feedback on our emerging recommendations. We know we have specific audiences that are really relevant to us. We're taking a bit of a page in my mind from the Land Use and Local Government group, where they're convening mayors and local officials in that roundtable format. That makes sense to us, and it probably could include consumer representatives. It certainly should include environmental justice advocates and members from the communities, as well as energy developers. And then finally, there's a wealth of expertise out there, and we're considering whether to invite some of those expert thinkers, whether they're the Sabin Center at NYU or some of the more technical houses, to help us frame and get the record right on some of the more rich and technical issues. So we're at work already, and we're excited. It's intimidating in a good way. So that ends my prepared remarks, and I hope to get good feedback from this whole council, including starting right now with questions you may have, or comments, or suggestions you'd like to make.
Okay, John, thank you. I saw Bob's hand up first.
Thank you, John, for that great summary. I was glad to see that you have carbon pricing there on your agenda, but I'd like to suggest you didn't list any interaction with the other panels in talking about carbon pricing. And personally, I'd like to see carbon pricing done in the context of all fossil fuel use, including transportation and the housing and all, and not simply in the electric production.
That was a deliberate punt. You're right. Carbon pricing is something that could be, that certainly has, should be discussed economy-wide. And it's a little bit above my pay grade to think about who should take that on.
but
Yeah.
I could see it actually being a Climate Action Council level issue, as well as maybe a panel specific issue. But
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I just want to make sure
very good
that.
observation. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for that.
Okay, Ann.
Thank you. Hi, John.
Hey, Ann.
My question is actually triggered by a couple questions that came along earlier relating to biofuels or renewable natural gas. And I noticed on your list you had last clean megawatts on the list. I was wondering if the topic of defining emissions free came up with the group. You know, there's the requirement for 70% renewables by 2030 and 100% emissions free by 2040. In my view, the statute's pretty clear on what counts as renewable, but a little more vague on what counts as emission free after that. And did that come up in your group discussions at all?
No, it did not come up in the discussions, but you, as I, are familiar with some of the thinking of some of our panel members, and I know that that's a topic that lots of us have some views on, and B, I think you're hinting at this. We probably can't get our work done unless we take that up. So good observation.
Yeah, thanks for that. I think it actually applies to some of the other panels as well. It's just one of those questions that are out there, and it's gonna be hard for everyone collectively to know what they're aiming for if they. I mean, I know also we want to make room for future innovation, things that haven't been commercialized yet. I don't want to get in the way of that, but it is sort of this nagging vagueness.
Agreed. And it's already blessed with a great diversity of opinion.
Okay, so we are at 10 minutes, but we have one more. Paul, do you want to take it away?
Sure, thank you. John, in one of your tables about natural gas, it mentioned connection to the energy and efficiency and housing panel. And at the risk of being a broken record, I'm worried about methane leaks and that this issue will fall between the cracks, so to speak. Sorry, that's the best I can do. If it turns out that in urban environments like New York City, if the distributed methane leaks that are there are derived from the natural gas infrastructure, what is there a panel or what part of the CAC would be taking that up? Again, I think there's evidence that there's an awful lot of methane emission from the natural gas infrastructure. And I'm worried that we have in our plans to assess and mitigate if the accounting of the emissions shows that that's really important. Are we working on figuring out how to mitigate in that area?
So Paul, do you mind if I take that one and then I'll kick it over to John if he's got some further thoughts?
Sure, Basil.
I would say many of the panels are going to be dealing with the issue of methane emissions, and we may want to have or at least charge every panel with considering that, and then finding a way to bring all of the panels together in some sort of a joint session to work through cross-fertilized recommendations, if that makes sense, rather than creating a new one for necessarily gathering lines or pipelines.
Yeah, I think creating new ones, just adds to the complexity, and so getting them together at some point. It sounds good. Thank you, Ben.
Okay, great.
So I'll just say that Paul's point sounds really important to me, and Basil's suggestion sounds super pragmatic and makes a lot of sense to me. Sign me up. Sign us up.
Get yourself signed up. Great, good question. Okay, John, thank you. Good job. All right, next slide, please. Eric, your turn.
Thank you. Thank you, Basil.
Thank you.
And good to see all the fellow heads of the other advisory panels. So this is the energy intensive and trade exposed industries, for which I am the chair of the advisory panel, and we've had a few meetings so far. And like many of the other panelists, we have panels. We have an engaged group of panelists who are thoughtful and experienced, and go across everything from business and policy and labor, workforce training, and academics. So that's been important to get those diverse views of opinion and expertise. And like the other panels, we've been open to the public on our presentations, including one of the initial presentations we had, the pathways presentation for the industrial sector by E3. So let's turn to the first slide, please. And as you can see on that, we're going to go through our scope. I might also add that we're also going to be looking at resilience, and we expect to provide a member of our group to land use and local government on that. So as you can see on here, there's six topic areas that are the focus of our advisory panel's scope of work. The first one is we plan to review the technologies and policies with the potential to reduce industrial emissions. We are looking at on-site fuel combustion. So that's critical right there for the on-site, also on-site non-combustion processes. And then lastly, the use of electricity. Second, we plan to provide input on the state's targets for industrial emissions. And I know some of you have asked about sort of specific numbers. I can tell you that at least in the pathway analysis report, which applies to on-site fuel combustion only, and in that report, that calls for a 6% reduction from 2016 to 2030, and then a much more significant reduction of about 82% by 2050. So the bulk of that reduction, as you can see, will come after 2030. And you know, of course, as part of that work, we will consult with the Power Generation Advisory Panel, which we know is leading that reduction in terms of thinking through the reduction of emissions from electricity. And then the third part is developing recommended strategies to reduce emissions in the industrial sectors of primarily manufacturing and construction. We'll look at mining, but to a lesser extent. Fourth and fifth, we'll provide advice and input. This is really to the Just Transition Working Group, and we'll provide input on defining energy intensive and trade exposed industries, and also policies to mitigate leakage and the anti-competitive impacts in those sectors. So in that regard, I look forward to working with Commissioners Reardon and Harris and trying to figure out how we best work collaboratively on those important issues. And then lastly, we will also seek to incorporate measures to support the environmental and climate justice into our recommendations. And so in that respect, we'll work with the Environmental Justice Advisory Group and also the Climate Justice Working Group. We can go to the next slide, please. Great. So like the other groups, we also have a pretty aggressive timeline, and these next two slides will go through that, give you a sense of our anticipating meetings, which again, as I mentioned, will all be open to the public. I won't spend as much time on these in case there are our questions. But if you look at the timing of these meetings, we are looking to review and identify our potential recommendations in October and November, so that we can decide on our preliminary recommendations in December. If we go to the next slide. Oh, I'm sorry, come back, because that's, anyway, so just to continue, in January is when we will expect to get input from the public. We will hold, that will be a critical part of the work that we do. And then later in the, after that in February and March, we'll take everything that we have and we'll use those months to evaluate, refine, and expand on our recommendations and how we implement those. So let's go to the last slide. Great, thank you. So, and again, like other groups, it's critically important that we get engagement external to our panel work, and there's a number of different ways that we will ensure that we do that. We have set up a new email address, which you can see on the screen, and that'll help us collect materials and input from the public. We've already started to get information and input already. And then also, as we go forward, we will reach out to in-state industries to get their input, to sort of get a better sense of those recommendations and the feasibility of those recommendations. As I said earlier, we will also coordinate with some of the other advisory panel groups, particularly the Just Transition Working Group. And I can tell you, we've already had a number of our members that have expressed interest in participating in that working group, so that there's good cross-pollination for that. And then in January, as I said, we will hold a virtual public input session, and that will also ensure that we're getting information and input from the public. And I will continue to provide updates on our progress as the work unfolds, so we can also get input from this group too. So I think that's it for now, and happy to open it up for discussion or take questions. So thank you, Basil.
Great, thanks, Eric. And we do have a couple of questions from this left. Anne.
Nope, that was my hand not put down. Sorry.
Okay. I saw Paul.
I love questions like that.
Paul's is gone now. Donna.
Thanks, Basil. So Eric, my question is again around cost, and I'm sure it must have come up with some of the folks on your panel. How will you assess that? How are you feeling and looking and trying to assess how this might impact, ability for manufacturers to grow in the state? How do you weigh that? And I know you're trying to look at ways to minimize leakage, so I'm just curious about how you guys will assess that. Thank you.
Thank you, Donna. That's an important question, and we've talked about that, and we're certainly going to do that by engaging with industries in the state, also through our Just Working Group, Just Transition Working Group. But that is clearly an important question that we need to do this in a way that ensures that those industries remain competitive. Cost is an important part of that, and that will become a critical topic that we will explore as we continue in our other meetings. So thank you for bringing that up.
Okay, I don't see any other questions for Eric. Eric, thank you.
Thank you, Basil.
Next slide, please. Roberta, please take it away.
Good afternoon. Actually, you're getting co-chair number 2 first this afternoon. And Commissioner Reardon and I, as co-chairs of the Just Transition Working Group, did want to close out these presentations with an overview of our progress thus far and plans. Next slide, please. As you do know, the Just Transition Working Group is a bit different than the advisory panels that we have been working on in the fact that we are not focused on a specific sector of the economy or of customers, but rather charged with a broader view of ensuring a just transition for New York State, including its workers, businesses, and communities as the objectives of the CLCPA are fulfilled. So, as you can read from the slide, the group has categorized its work roughly into 5 categories: workforce development and training, power plant inventory and reuse, business impacts, just transition principles, and a job study. Of these, all essentially are reflecting the requirements laid out for our group in the statute, with the exception of the Just Transition Principles work, which is an extra work stream the group has decided to pursue and share with respect to a set of guiding principles to inform our collective processes as a Climate Action Council and as advisory panels. We do see many aspects of our work engaging fully with other panels, as you see noted on this slide on the right column, particularly with respect to sectors where job training and talent requirements are expected to be most relevant, such as energy efficiency and housing. As you can see, our power plant work does require us to identify sites that may be closed in the future and identify issues and opportunities for reuse. So we will obviously be engaging closely with the Power Generation Advisory Panel in conducting that work, as well as the Land Use and Local Government group. This is one of 2 groups for which we've determined that we would like to form a subgroup to drive progress and bring materials back to our full working group for consideration. We've also planned to follow this subgroup format for business impacts, which is a broad, multifaceted work stream that really does center around energy intensive and trade exposed industry, for which we will be engaging closely with the the panel that we just heard from. And finally, one of the major deliverables of this work group will be the job study, which is investigating a large set of employment and workforce impact questions. And we do plan to share progress on this study in future meetings, given its scope and longevity. With that, I will pass the presentation over to the next slide and to Commissioner Reardon to walk us through the timeline and our plans for engagement. Commissioner?
Thank you, Doreen, and greetings to the members of the council. Nice to see you virtually. Now, on this slide, you can see mapped out the monthly meeting structure that will be the foundation of the Just Transition Working Group's engagement on the topics that Doreen just walked us through. We also anticipate that the working group will have to make progress in between these monthly meetings as well, because we have an awful lot on our plates. Beginning next month, we'll be starting with a deep dive on business impacts with input and collaboration from our partners in EITE. December will then see the group focus on power plant related inquiries with involvement with the Power Gen and the Land Use and Local Government advisory panels. We also expect to make progress on the Just Transition Principles effort that Doreen mentioned over these 2 meetings. Then in January, we will review the forthcoming results of NYSERDA's annual Clean Energy Industry Report and begin developing our preliminary recommendations to the CAC with additional report outs updating on progress from other major work streams. In February, we'll continue forging ahead and plan to dedicate time for debriefing and reflecting on our meetings with the other advisory panels and our public engagement forum, which I'll discuss on the next slide. We'll hear more report outs and continue refining recommendations and work products. In March, we will discuss and finalize our recommendations to the CAC and hear final report outs from the various work streams, including any interim results or information available from the job study scoping process. And then beyond March, we do expect our working group to remain active on a periodic and ongoing basis to provide advice and input as needed, as well as to consider and weigh in on the job study as it progresses from scoping to completion including with respect to the pathways integration modeling that will take place starting in April. So next slide, please. Finally, here is a brief overview of our group's plan for external and public engagement. We've set up and will be actively monitoring a public engagement and email address shown here, and we encourage interested members of the public to share their written feedback there. The working group may also put out targeted requests for input based on how our discussions evolve. Next, we also plan to hold a public engagement forum in the next 2 months, roughly, formatted as a virtual listening session by webinar. We're excited for that event to be a chance for the group to hear directly from experts and members of the public. You know, it's important to note that we do anticipate that input from external experts will be incorporated into Just Transition Working Group meetings. We have a number of very complex topics in our purview, such as carbon leakage, business leakage, power plants, and workforce development strategies, among others, and we will likely benefit as a group from hearing from targeted parties. And of course, all of our meeting slides and notes will be posted on the CAC website for reference and review. And with that, we can open the floor for questions unless you have any last comments, Noreen?
I do not.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I don't see any questions. Feel free.
I see
Did
Ann
you stump the
Reynolds.
band?
There's Ann. Yep.
Yeah.
Thanks. So just so I understand it correctly, the clean energy industry report is the every year thing, and the job study is something that's forward-looking, created by the law, what jobs will be created if we achieve these goals. Is that the same?
That's correct. The Clean Energy Industry Report is our annual backcast, and in this case, it will cover 2019 and a bit about COVID-19 related impacts in 2020 thus far, whereas the job study is a much more comprehensive macroeconomic look at our world under the CLCPA.
And one last part of this question, then Commissioner also mentioned the pathways integration modeling that will be starting in April. Can you remind me what that means?
What that means is that essentially all of this work is when I say all of it, all of these inputs will need to be aggregated. And when I say that, I mean not just from our working group, but from the advisory panels as well. And we, and specifically the study the commissioner was referencing, will become really an input into this integration analysis. Again, the goal is to really take a statewide view as to what all of these sectors will contribute.
We're aiming for April for that to start or see result of it?
Start. Ann.
Thanks. No, I just didn't want to put you on the spot. I'm just curious, nosy even.
That would be very ambitious.
Okay, we've got a couple of questions there. Dennis. And then Gavin.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. Doreen, just a little more on the workforce. Will the workforce assessment that we do, because it's going to be forward thinking, will it encompass green energy manufacturing jobs as well, as we kind of like look at New York manufacturing and engaging them more in the supply chain of delivering these type of green energy solutions?
Doreen, do you want to?
Yeah, I was going to say, Commissioner, did you want to start? I'm happy to follow your lead.
We talked about this in our last meeting, that when you talk about just transition, people tend to think of it as the building and construction of the power supply. But there are green jobs that will be brand new across the spectrum, certainly including manufacturing. So we very much want it all to be made in New York as much as possible.
Okay. Gavin?
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. My question is more, I think more about process the subgroup of the working group, and they're working on the power plant inventory issues. Who is on that group, and what is their task as they search and try to complete this mission? I'm just a little confused about the process.
Sure, Gavin, and I'm glad you're asking more. You know, we have actually, at our last meeting of the working group, we discussed as a team the fact that this particular piece of work was going to require, I would say, deep understanding of the particular issues on that study, and such that really what we wanted to do was take nominations, self-nominations among the members to dig deeply into some of the data sources and uses that would contribute to that study. So the group is still actually in formation, but a number of members have nominated or have requested to be part of that subgroup and ultimately report their approaches and conclusions for the broader working group's consideration. So so it's literally to make, I would say, faster progress. That's the ultimate goal.
May I chime in here?
Of course.
So I'm actually on that working group with a couple of colleagues from Local 1-2 and from IBW, and we're also, NYSERDA is engaging obviously some important resources to help get that work done, and I think it's a really good. It's a privilege for me to be on the working group. I think it's really good that we have the organized labor colleagues on that working group that we do. And in fact, I should mention that, it made us on the power gen panel think we'd been a little bit remiss in our labor representation, and are actively considering and would like to come back to this council with a proposal to maybe kind of up the representation on that as well. But right now it's outside help, some of NYSERDA staff, and then the gang of three that I mentioned as the working group on Doreen and under Doreen and Roberta.
Thanks for that, John. To build upon a comment that Peter Iwanowitz made earlier, as you know, John, better than most, these power plants across New York State are huge economic engines and pay huge amounts of money in property taxes. I think it'd be really important to have some local government officials on this working group because of the impact that these power plants have, particularly not just statewide, but particularly in upstate New York, because those impacts and recommendations could impact their futures. So I'd ask you to consider that.
Yeah, that's a good point, Gavin. I have a few thoughts based on our discussion earlier around, broader engagement with local governments. So maybe there's a way to integrate that in a smart way, but good point.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, I don't see any other hands up. Doreen, Roberta, good job.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, let's go to the next slide, please. So we wanted to open up with a discussion on waste emissions. As you know, the law does not anticipate a panel on waste specifically, but several of you have brought up in past meetings the need for such a panel for very valid reasons. So what I thought we would do is have Deputy Commissioner Martin Brand from DEC here, who oversees our materials management and remediation divisions, get into the issue of waste, and then present to you all the concept of a waste panel. And then we're good there. I'd like to move to a vote to determine that we actually set this panel in motion. Martin, do you have connectivity? And I apologize for the connectivity here in the building. It's not quite good today.
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner. I can hear you fine. I can see your picture and all the other people. Works good. I'm a little lagging behind on the slides. So I'm going to work kind of off of my own slides. There's only 3, so it shouldn't be much, but I'm about a half a slide behind all of you. So bear with me if I seem to be talking about something that you cannot see or vice versa. So the next slide, please. You all should be looking at a slide that says waste emissions and then scope at the top of that. Is that somebody nod at me? Okay, thank you. So thank you, Commissioner. Yes, we're going to talk about a little bit about a waste panel and what that might look like and what the scope of work might entail, what type of stakeholder engagement we would perform, what the membership might look like, and some next steps moving forward in order to make that actually come about. Your first slide here is on the scope, and it shouldn't come to any surprise to anyone looking at the waste management structure in New York State. We're certainly going to evaluate emissions and mitigation strategies for a wide range of these waste generating sectors, including the traditional municipal and commercial solid waste generation infrastructure in New York, which involves facilities like transfer stations and landfills and waste to energy, municipal combustors and cogen facilities. And look at all the handling and transportation and disposal aspects for that infrastructure, including some of the large scale construction, demolition, debris, materials processing activities that we see around the state. We're certainly going to evaluate recycling, both the sort of post-consumer type efforts that you're all familiar with, as well as some of the industrial and commercial pre-consumer efforts, looking at waste reduction, waste avoidance programs, with an eye, obviously, to evaluating ways that we can reduce waste from being created in the first place, or to handle it in a more sustainable and sort of enlightened life cycle way in the future. We're going to look at a broad category of organic waste. I lumped these all together, but certainly things like food waste, biosolids, wastewater treatment plants, composting facilities, cross-cutting component of agricultural production, and then some of the energy aspects of that as well, including anaerobic digestion. And then I put this in here, the manufacturing hazardous waste generation. I don't think it's going to be a huge component of this evaluation, but certainly to take a look at some of our large-scale hazardous waste generators and ways we can come up with strategies to reduce emissions there. Next slide, please. Okay. So stakeholder participation. This is really a kind of a broad brush of some of the constituencies that we want represented on a membership of any waste panel. Certainly environmental justice, host communities would be a very large component of this. So, historically, the waste infrastructure in the United States has been disproportionately established in sort of EJ communities around the country. So we want to obviously have a strong participation there. We will look at municipalities and local governments, large and small, get a good cross section of the concerns and issues that are facing municipalities around the state. We got representation from our solid waste management units, different authorities around the state at city and county level. Obviously, we're going to have a strong alignment, we hope, with some of the state solid waste management planning processes that we have underway right now. And, so we want to bring those people in board. A number of advocacy groups and subject matter experts would be part of any waste panel, certainly the environmental community, county, local governments, trade organizations, and some of those groups that we work with on sustainability issues and recycling education and advocacy programs as well, and academia and technical consultants to provide some of that subject matter expertise that we need. The industry has to be a big player in any waste panel. Most of the industry in the state is privately owned, so certainly operators, haulers, disposal firms, those type entities would be a key portion of the waste panel. And then again, as I mentioned, some of the large scale industrial hazardous waste generators that could lend some of their expertise and experience to this process. Next slide. So what might this work look like? So obviously, we're looking for your approval or go ahead for the creation of a waste panel here. Obviously, we are already behind all the other panels in terms of the work that they've been performing here the last couple of months. So in order to catch up, there's a number of things that we are proposing to do. One is that we are looking for recommendations for membership. We've already started looking at a draft list of potential members, but we certainly would welcome any recommendations from the CIC members for individuals to participate in the panel. We are asking that you send those recommendations along by October 15th. I know that's a short time frame, but it's the only way we're going to really accommodate the aggressive schedule for the rest of the council and catch up here. DEC will chair the panel, and I believe the commissioner intends for me to chair that. So I welcome the opportunity to work with all of you. And DEC will obviously provide support staff from a variety of disciplines to support the activities of the panel. We would take those recommendations from the council and propose others that would indicate the membership of the panel. Ideally, we would convene a special session before the next meeting of the CAC, which is scheduled for late November. If we can do that, that would save us some time and get us up and running. We again propose that membership for approval to the CAC at some point late October, early November. In order to catch up here and expedite the work of the panel, the DEC team is going to start work right away on the work plan and the scope development. We'll do this to essentially give the panel a jump start on the work that we need to do. Obviously, the panel itself would ultimately decide on the scope of work and the work plan and our engagement plan moving forward. But we think this will expedite the work and get us a little bit more back on track with the other panels. So that is our very broad brush proposal here for a waste emissions advisory panel. And I'll turn it back to Commissioner Stegos for any follow-up.
Before we do any take any action, I want to open it up for questions. I do see Gavin and Bob. I think it was Bob first, then Gavin.
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner, and thank you, Martin, for that summary. I think it's a good idea to proceed with a panel, so I'm supportive of the idea, and I understand the tight timeline, so that's going to be ambitious, but I think it's important. I did want to bring up something that you and I have discussed before, and I want the whole group to be aware of my thought on it, and that is, the waste stream overall for the greenhouse gas emissions for the state. They're smaller than the fossil fuel use, but they're not trivial. It's about 20% of the statewide emissions are coming from this industry and these sources. So it's an important panel. But also, if we look in detail at the emissions, 95% of the total emissions from waste in New York are coming, it's methane, it's not carbon dioxide. It's only 5% carbon dioxide. So when you think of it that way, where's the methane coming from? It's the leakage from landfills, it's the emissions from wastewater treatment plants, it's things like that. It's not the entire industry. So when we think about the panel, I suggest that the membership be focused not on who the economic players are in the waste industry, but rather where the greenhouse gas emissions are actually coming from. Because our goal, of course, is to reduce those. So I would suggest a big focus, certainly on landfills, certainly on wastewater treatment plants, maybe some other factors. Thank you.
Thank you. We will certainly consider that recommendation.
Gavin?
Just very quickly, Basil, thanks to you and your staff and Jared and Martin for reaching out. They've reached out to me a few times on this issue. I like the progress. I think it is really well done. And one thing I would like to add to it is here, I think it's really appropriate on how you've decided to reach out to local government authority, waste management experts to make this happen. That will make this process be a lot smoother, and I think helping Martin accomplish some of these goals. So thank you for that.
Great. Thanks, Gavin. Raya.
Hi, thank you so much, and also for understanding and being sensitive to how critical this issue is to environmental justice. A technical question. As we're looking to vote on this, and of course the statute provides the CAC, to create panels. Can we presume that, we saw the scope and the type of constituents, that the similar rules will apply to this panel as apply to the others, and just thinking about the technical piece of this moving forward?
Yes, right. If you didn't hear me, yes, absolutely. The same expectations will apply to this panel as all the rest.
Thank you very much.
I didn't spend a lot of time on that, but yes, absolutely the same interaction with the council, the same public engagement, the same transparency, all those same things that the other panels are engaged in will be part of this panel's scope of work as well.
Thank you very much. I think that is a very positive development.
Great, thank you. I think we had Peter and then Ron.
Yeah, I'll just go real quickly to echo my thanks. I think this is the right approach, and I really just want to thank you, Commissioner, for having the staff reach out and sort of work through these issues. I think it's an important thing to engage in treating it like a panel that would be consistent with the others. And then just one final recommendation is to assure that all the advisory panels are posting their meetings ahead of time and allowing for the public to at least participate through watching them. And I'm really just thrilled across the board to see the level panels that are going to be actually receiving public comment and engagement prior to us going out with a plan. So I just wanted to take that moment as well to thank everybody for that hard work.
Great, thank you, Peter. And Ron.
Hey, Commissioner, thank you. I'll be really brief, but I just want to throw in a plug for consideration with coordination with the Transportation Advisory Panel. One of the issues we'll have to address is not only how the waste gets to where it's going, whether by truck, whether by rail, but there's also a lot of permitting issues for oversized, overweight vehicles. So just want to throw that plug in that the Advisory Panel for Transportation would love to work with you on this.
All right, that's a great idea. Fantastic. Thank you, Ron. Bob, you have your hand up still, or is that old?
Sorry, no.
Okay. Okay. If we don't have any further questions, I'm going to call for a vote. Can I have a motion to create a waste emissions advisory panel?
Motion.
Second.
Second.
Okay. Let's move to votes. Valerie, you want to call roll on this?
Absolutely. Good afternoon, everyone. Again, when I call your name, please acknowledge your vote on the resolution as it's been presented. Co-Chair Harris?
Aye.
Co-Chair Sagos?
Aye.
Commissioner Ball?
Aye.
Donna DeCarolis?
Aye.
Commissioner Dominguez?
Aye.
Oh, sorry, Ron Epstein. Gavin Donahue?
Aye.
Dennis Elsenbeck?
Aye.
CEO Falcone?
Aye.
Commissioner Gertler?
Aye.
Rose Harvey?
Aye.
Bob Howard?
Aye.
Peter Iwanowitz?
Aye.
Chancellor Malatros?
Yep. Aye.
CEO Quinones?
Aye.
Commissioner Reardon,
Aye.
Dan Reynolds,
Aye.
Chair Rhodes,
Aye.
Keisha Santiago,
Aye.
Maya Salter,
Aye.
Paul Shepson,
Aye.
Commissioner Wisniewskis, or Rebecca Kepnick,
Aye.
Gary Ginsberg.
Aye.
The ayes have it. With that, the resolution is adopted.
Excellent. Thank you very much. So next time we'll have an 80-minute round, and/or we're shortening the presentations. But congratulations, everybody. Okay, next slide, please.
Great.
Is that you, Doreen? Yeah, go ahead.
It is. I'm ready. Thank you again. And moving on to the next part of the agenda, as I had indicated, many of you have expressed an interest in learning and exploring our electricity system in more detail. So we're pleased today to have a series of presentations with just that deliverable, focusing on some of the planning and analysis efforts we have underway as a state in planning for the reality that we will see under the CLCPA. So with that, I would like to turn the discussion to Chair John Rhodes to start the discussion with a bit of an overview. John?
Thanks very much, Doreen. I think it's very good that we have a chance today to have this focused overview of the electricity system. Decarbonizing our economy is going to meaningfully change that system. We're going to have supply side technologies that we're going to rely on for zero emission electricity, as well as demand side changes where we're going to see electrification of transportation, as we've already discussed, and of heating for buildings. And we already have some line of sight to how these things are going to play out or what the needs are going to be through the pathways work that E3 has presented for us already. In all this, we know we're going to need to plan and build our electricity system that's in a way that's going to maintain reliability throughout all components of the system that will ensure equity and affordability and manage costs to the consumers of electricity in New York while we go through and plan and undertake these changes in this growth. In New York, we've seen a number of studies that look at these issues, decarbonization studies that try to inform the discussion and create an awareness of the considerations that we need to take into account, such as how to manage electrification, how to create the flexibility, and importantly, how do we avoid overbuild scenarios of extreme new peaks, which are the bane of every system. On the plus side, New York has got a terrific track record, been very effective in establishing programs that unlock innovation and investment from the best solution providers, including from the private markets, that result in good, low-cost resources and innovations that come onto the system. So that's the promise, and then that's the work we're going to have to deal with. And these two presentations that we're going to have today are going to help put this council on course to making good decisions on the investments that we need, on the innovations that we need as we go through our whole council process and ultimately end up with a scoping plan that that really charts the way that we need for the system. So for that education that we're going to get today, it's great to note that we have two of the state's best experts to speak on the work that's already underway on understanding the system as it is and on planning its future, both on the bulk system side and on the sub-bulk or distribution side.
On the bulk side, first we'll hear from Rich Dewey, who's the president and CEO of the New York Independent System Operator, and he'll share some outputs of their most recent climate analysis work. And of course, we all appreciate Rich's being available to meet with us and take us through this NYSO work. And then after Rich, we're going to hear from Tammy Mitchell, Director of the Office of Electric, Gas, and Water at DPS, who will share with us key perspectives on utility level distribution in the state and the utility level electricity system, and will also report to us on the planning work underway by the state for bulk and distribution level planning of the new transmission system that we need. So this is going to be good stuff. Let's start with Rich, and I now turn the microphone over to you.
Great. Thank you, John, for that introduction. Can everyone hear me?
Definitely.
Okay, I can, good. Yes, thank you.
Thanks. Thanks for the introduction, John. Doreen and Basil, thank you for the opportunity to speak with this group. It's a pleasure. Go to the next slide, please. A little bit of an overview about the New York ISO. Many of you know who we are, so I'm not going to deliberate on this too long. You know, we're responsible for reliability. We're responsible for the wholesale electricity markets. We're responsible for planning the system for the future and also providing factual information. We like to view ourselves as an authoritative source about the power grid within New York. I'm going to focus today on the planning analysis and some of the work that we have already done and work that's in flight. And much of what we're trying to do is really be supportive to this Climate Action Council and to New York State in general as a means to be a valuable resource to help achieve the goals that we have in front of us. If you go to the next slide. A little bit about our planning structures. You know, there are some tariff obligated studies that we do on a biennial basis. One is looking at the economic planning for New York State, specifically focusing on the transmission system, and also a reliability needs assessment, which looks at the overall reliability requirements for the grid. And that's a 10-year look ahead we do every 2 years just to make sure we've got the right kind of resources in place to ensure that we're compliant with the reliability standards, which in New York State are the most stringent reliability standards in the country. And then in addition to that, this year we kicked off a climate change study, really focusing on some of those long-range impacts that climate change is expected to have on our system and on our grid, and use that as a tool to try to develop solutions so that we can be ready for those changes. We refer to this collection of studies as really our grid in transition efforts, recognizing that there's going to be a gigantic change that's going to take place in the power grid as driven by the desire to hit some of these policy goals. In New York State, we are setting the standard, if you will, in terms of aggressive policy objectives, and the legislation that was passed and is approved by the governor is really leading the nation. And you know, we're excited at the New York ISO to be able to be helpful and contribute to some of that. Next slide. Recognizing that we've got a long way to go, you know, one of the challenges we have in New York State is we have made some tremendous strides in terms of our renewable integration, but the key point here on this slide that is going to be the challenge that we really need to address is, if you look on the right side of that, you know, upstate New York is pretty carbon free already in terms of the supply, and downstate there's a high intensity of carbon producing power plants. And the challenge will be to be able to move that power into New York City to displace the generation that's coming from those resources. And that'll be instrumental to how we achieve those goals. And many of our studies are looking at the ways that we can be useful in that regard. Next slide. One of the things that is pretty notable is we've made good progress. And when you look at from 2000 to the current time frame, the efficiency of the generation fleet has made demonstrative progress. This is not just because of the addition of new renewables and the integration of new renewable resources, but really just the cleaning efficiency gains of the fleet itself has yielded some progress, but there's a long way to go. And I don't have to tell you that, and we've got to take some deliberate steps to be able to move the fleet in the direction we need to. If you go to the next slide, again, thinking about the plans that we've put in place at the New York ISO to try to be helpful in this regard, our grid and transition plan is looking at how we can position our markets to be able to be a platform for that change, and also doing it in a way that achieves the highest level of reliability at the most cost-effective means. And we're big proponents of markets. We think that the wholesale markets themselves are the most cost-effective way to help move the industry towards these goals. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the needs that we're going to have into the future. A lot of the analysis that we've identified through our studies is very consistent with some of the work that E3 has done that you've seen presented to you as part of this council. Next slide. Maybe go 2 slides. One more. One of the things we look at from a demand standpoint, when you start thinking about the climate change study that we initiated, we've never had a very flexible and consistent model to be able to measure demand. And this is really looking at load and consumption, not just as driven by the impacts and the changes that we're seeing in the industry itself, but also as brought on by climate change. So one of the things we did last year was working with one of the leading load forecasting vendors. We came up with a model that looks out into the 2030, 2040, 2050 range, and really develop a tool that looks at not only what we think the demand is going to be, but also the shape of that curve. So when you start thinking about the electrification of the transportation sector and the electrification of the building sector, the shape of the curve is going to change. And when you consider that against the characteristics of what some of the renewable resources provide in terms of the hours of the day that they provide that energy, it's really important to have a good model. So we went through and developed a long-range forecasting model, which not only gives us an initial estimate of what we think the load is going to look like out into the future, but it's a valuable tool that we can make available for other studies and continue to assess that as we make progress across the other sectors. Next slide. One of the things which we know is, there's going to be a lot of variability in terms of what that demand is going to look like. There's going to be different rates of adoption and different efficiencies with some of these new technologies. So we look at these demand trends more as guideposts, and not that we're trying to predict exactly what the demand is going to look like, but more develop what the shape of those curves are going to be, and then think about what the different parameters are that we can update on a regular basis as we make progress across the other sectors in terms of the electrification. That'll be important to inform future studies and those incremental intermediary studies that we do each year to take a look at what the reliability needs are. It's going to be an effective tool to keep track of that. Next slide. One of the things, and we've talked about this, I believe, but when you start thinking about the electrification of transportation and the buildings, New York State will, we predict, turn from a summer peaking system, which is largely driven by air conditioning load, into a winter peaking system. And that's important to know, because as we start thinking about what sort of resources we're going to need to be able to achieve these goals, you've got to think about the output characteristics of the renewables, wind and solar, and making sure we've got the right kind of not only the locations right, but also the attributes of some of the resources that are going to be necessary to balance demand when the intermittents aren't performing like we need them to. Next slide. One of the things we look at, I mentioned our reliability needs assessment. The current system has got some reliability needs that we got to keep our eyes on. One of the responsibilities we have at the New York ISO, as I indicated, is to make sure that on an every 2-year basis, we carefully look at what the next 10 years reliability needs are going to be. And when we identify some needs, then we put in place planning activities, which is done in tight collaboration with the Department of Public Service and also the utilities within New York State to come up with solutions to make sure we can maintain that level of reliability that we need. So one of the things we're looking at is, in recognition of the retirement of some of the peaker plants, which is happening because of compliance with the new DEC emissions rules. What sort of needs are going to be present on the system as a result of that? And then how do we come up with solutions to make sure we can maintain reliability? We look at reliability as our #1 job, and we've got to make sure that we've got the right resources in place. So we have identified some needs over the 2023 to 2030 time period. Most of those needs are in New York City. And the next step is to take a close look from a planning standpoint with the utilities and with DPS, come up with solutions that we can put in place. And that's a mix of solutions. It doesn't necessarily have to be additional generation. It's also transmission, energy efficiency, storage, I think will be a big contributor to that. And that's going to have to be closely scrutinized, quite honestly, with the anticipated load impacts as a result of the pandemic, which will be pretty deterministic in terms of how quickly the economy bounces back, how quickly load levels return in New York City, and we've got to make sure that we've got the solutions coming in at the right time. So that's one of the things that we do on a regular basis here at the New York ISO, and we're going to continue to do that through the transition as we march towards the 2030 and 2040 mileposts for achievement of these goals. Okay, next slide. 2 slides actually. So transmission, one of the things we look at pretty closely is, as I indicated on one of the early charts, one of the specific challenges that New York State's going to have to achieve these goals is the ability to move the clean upstate power down into New York City to displace that generation that's in the city. Some of the things that are already underway, I'm happy to report, and through the collaboration with the Public Service Commission and Chair Rhodes, along with New York ISO's planning, is 2 projects that are actually in flight, and we anticipate will be in service within the next couple of years through the public policy transmission process. One is in Western New York, which will allow for the full delivery of power from the Niagara power plant under all conditions, and also increase the amount of imports, clean hydro imports we can get from Ontario, and also the AC transmission project, which significantly increases the bandwidth for power transmission from central New York to the Capital District and down into the lower Hudson Valley. So those were 2 significant choke points in our transmission system, and they continue to be bottlenecks as we try to move some of that renewable power down towards New York City, and they'll go a long way towards relieving some of those constraints. So that's work that's in flight. Next slide, please. I mentioned earlier that every year we do an economic planning study, which is really intended to look for projects or identification of projects that, based on the economic advantages that they might present, would make sense to put in place. One of the things we did this year is recognizing how important the CLCPA goals are. We did a scenario specifically to look at, based on some hypothetical placement of new renewable resources in northern and western New York, where would the choke points on the transmission system become evident? So one of the challenges we have now, even with the existing system at the level of penetration we have of renewables, is frequently, too frequently, the ability to move that power from the areas where they're deployed down into central and southeastern New York. The transmission system is constrained, and we have to curtail those wind systems, which basically means we back them down. So it's a lost opportunity to deliver renewables into the system. And we've looked at where those choke points might be, that as we continue to build out renewable projects in upstate New York, where will the transmission system be constrained? So we've identified a number of pockets that should give us an opportunity from a planning standpoint to identify transmission upgrades, which will be necessary in order to move that power from northern and western New York onto the backbone, and then ultimately down into New York City. So that was a good study that we did, and hopefully that will be useful in terms of looking at priority projects and maybe potential future public policy needs that can be addressed. But that's going to be important in order for New York State to be able to hit these goals. Because if we can't move the power off the system where it's generated down to where it's consumed, it's going to be really challenging to hit the targets. Next slide. 2 slides really. So the next study I want to talk about. So the climate change study, I mentioned what we did. The phase 1, we talked about the load forecast and the development of a model that really gives us a powerful tool to be able to assess how changes in the load will impact new resources coming onto the system. The phase 2 study, which was done this year, is looking really at the supply and looking at the different scenarios, assuming number one, that the targets that were laid out within the legislation are achieved at the levels, but also additional resources which are going to be necessary to meet the load and to ultimately achieve the targets. So this looks at a hypothetical mix of different types of generation, and then we look at a reliability analysis to compare historically how these intermittent resources perform in the context of what the new load profiles we are anticipating. And we look for those opportunities, and we try to identify where we've got gaps and where we've got needs and where we're going to need different solutions to make sure that we can achieve the goals. If you go to the next slide, this is a sample of the hypothetical mix that we looked at. I think the most important thing to focus on here is we're assuming that the goals will be met, and we're assuming that by 2040 we are going to get to that zero carbon electric system. If you look at the maybe 11 o'clock on these charts, you see there's a gray area. That one of these is summer and one of them is winter. You can see we're a winter peaking system, so that's why the gray is a little bit bigger in the winter. Once we get to 2040, what we have identified here is a generic dispatchable resource. So right now, we've identified at certain times under the scenarios we've analyzed, there will be periods of time that the wind and solar resources by themselves will not be able to meet the load. So those dispatchable resources either need to be flexible load, which can curtail operation and drop off the system, or it could be some carbon neutral dispatchable resource. And here's where the innovation comes in, and here's where we got to get some of those new resources. And Doreen, you mentioned it earlier, some of those new products, the commercialization of new capabilities, and that could be a carbon neutral fuel, that could be carbon capture and sequestration. We look at it more as the attribute of what you need, and the attribute that's got to be on the system is some unit that can on demand produce electricity and do so in a way that doesn't produce carbon. So innovation and new technology is going to be important here, we believe, to be able to achieve these goals and get to that last small percentage of resources in order to get to that carbon-free electric system of the future that we're looking for. If we go to the next slide, this might look a little familiar to you. This is our study found a lot of the same information that the E3 study produced for you, the Pathways study, and this is how we got to the conclusion that we need some dispatchable resources. We looked at historical profiles of the performance of the wind and the solar at various times of the year, and we looked at what that load curve is going to look like. And in every simulation we did, we identified there's periods of time where the sum total of the wind and the solar does not equal the load that's going to be on the system at that time. And there's enough examples where the duration of time of that gap is longer than we anticipate could be covered with battery storage. So battery storage is really important to hit those solve those short-term problems. But there's going to be enough instances in our analysis, our simulations, where that duration of time is too long for battery storage. So there's got to be that dispatchable carbon-free resource that we're going to need to develop, and innovation is going to be key to be able to do that. One of the things we're a proponent of at the NYSO is using markets and effective market signals to be able to attract the kind of R&D and investment that's going to be necessary to bring those new resources to the market, quite honestly. John, in his power generation advisory panel, mentioned carbon pricing. We think that that's an important, valuable, powerful tool that could do that. But it's really going to require that that application of capital and that innovation to be able to provide that resource for the system. Next slide. And one more. So just in summary, I just want to hit a couple of key takeaways. You know, one of the things that I think is important to note, that in all the analysis that we've done, and the E3 study confirms this, intermittency of wind and solar, as well as the time challenges of battery storage, seems like it's very highly unlikely that exclusively these targets will be met with just those resources. So that's where we start looking at some of the innovative approach that's going to be necessary to be able to actually hit the 2040 goal. Transmission investment is going to be critical to be able to move the power from upstate down into the city and into some of the load pockets just even across New York City is going to be absolutely important. We're not going to achieve the goals without that. Thinking third bullet, just again about that innovation. You know, there's going to be capital investment that's going to need to be made in order to bring some of these innovative R&D systems to the market so that they're available to us by 2040. And again, battery storage is really going to be important. It's going to be valuable, and it's going to be a powerful tool to help us hit the short duration gaps. But a lot of the simulations and just looking at the historical patterns associated with the renewable resources like wind and solar, it's unlikely we're going to be able to achieve some of those long duration gaps from supply. And again, we think economics driven by market solutions is the most cost-effective and efficient means to be able to achieve that. With that, I'll stop. I'm mindful of your time. I don't know how much time I actually had, Commissioner Sagos, but I'll entertain questions.
Rich, if we can we proceed straight to Tammy, and then after both of you have gone, have Doreen orchestrate questions, just to make sure that we have enough time. But thank you. As those of us who know you are getting used to, it's a very clear presentation of some very important scenarios and future needs. Really very informative. So thank you very much. And so with that, as promised, I will turn it over to Tammy Mitchell. I hope you're on.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Tammy Mitchell. I'm the Director of the Office of Electric, Gas, and Water at the department, as John mentioned. I've been with the department almost 29 years now, hard to believe. Throughout my career, I've worked on various aspects of utility regulation, including rates, reliability and safety, planning, siting, and policy implementation. But most recently, I've been focusing in large part on what needs to happen with respect to New York's transmission distribution system to integrate clean energy resources and achieve the state's CLCPA goals. So today I plan to give a little background on the electric system and then discuss some of the activities currently underway at the department related to transitioning to a clean energy grid. So next slide. So we heard from Rich on a number of initiatives New York ISO is undertaking related to bulk system planning. So I wanted to first just briefly explain a little bit of the distinction between what we call the bulk transmission system versus the distribution system. Although it should be noted that there is throughout the state coordination and cooperation between utilities and the New York ISO with respect to planning and operation of the state's electric grid. And furthermore, DPS, the New York ISO, NYPA, LIPA, and NYSERDA all work closely on planning efforts and implementation of the state's energy policy objectives. With that said, the bulk system consists of large electric generating facilities, typically 5 megawatts or larger, and the high voltage transmission system, which generally are transmission lines that are 230 kilovolts or higher. The New York ISO plans for and operates the bulk transmission system, which delivers the power to the lower voltage system and ultimately to businesses and homes. The New York ISO also runs the competitive market for the independent generators that produce the power. From a regulatory perspective, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, or FERC, sets the rates for bulk system investments. And just to note, while the New York ISO plans for and operates the bulk system, the New York ISO does not own those assets. Rather, the generation is primarily owned by independent generation owners, and the New York State transmission facilities are primarily owned by New York State utilities, along with some independent developers. Local transmission and distribution planning is carried out by regulated utilities, and the Public Service Commission, as the regulator, oversees that planning process. The Public Service Commission also approves funding of utility local transmission and distribution investments. And as the regulator, the PSC has a duty to ensure reliability at just and reasonable rates. Retail activities or customer-facing activities, including providing supply, electricity supply, offering alternative rate options, billing, and other retail services are carried out by the utilities, as well as independent energy service companies, or ESCOs. And so next slide, please. So now I'll briefly discuss the utility rate case process. So utility rate cases are the primary mechanism for establishing utility capital and operating expenditure levels, among other things. Rate cases are the public window for guiding utility expenditures, since these proceedings provide an opportunity for stakeholders to weigh in by providing either written testimony or by participating in settlement discussions. In addition, rate cases provide an opportunity for the Commission to receive input on implementation of state priorities, including clean energy programs and low-income assistance programs. At the conclusion of the rate case process, which is generally an 11-month process, the Commission makes a decision based on a full record before it on all aspects of the case, including allowed utility expenditure levels, allowed rates of return on investment, and implementation of policies and programs. The Commission within the rate case process ultimately needs to balance the need for utility investments for reliability and resilience and investments to achieve the state programs with the rate impacts on customers. You'll see that the slide also contains a chart which shows each of the New York State utilities' current operating revenues, just to give a little bit of perspective. Next slide, please. Here we see the average monthly residential customer electric bills for each of the New York State utilities. You can see that a typical monthly electric bill ranges from about $75 to $130 per month. Notably, the Commission-approved Energy Affordability Program provides $237 million in bill assistance to about 937,000 low-income utility customers to offset electric utility costs. The chart also shows the breakout between the major components of the bill, which are delivery, commodity, and surcharges. Typically, delivery costs represent about 2/3 of the bill, while commodity costs are about 1/3 of the bill, and surcharges generally represent a small percentage of the bill. One other point to note related to utility bills is that taxes represent approximately 15% of the monthly electric bills for upstate utility customers and approximately 25% of the bill for Con Edison customers. Next slide, please. This slide shows the utility's recent performance with respect to two primary reliability metrics that the Public Service Commission tracks. which are frequency and duration of interruptions. The data is shown both including and excluding Con Edison, since the total number of customers in the Con Edison service territory, as well as the fact that a large portion of the Con Edison system is undergrounded and therefore is much more reliable, can skew these metrics. So we can see that excluding Con Edison, the statewide frequency metric is about 1, which means that on average, a customer in New York State will experience 1 outage per year. With respect to duration, statewide, the average length of an outage experienced by customers is about 2 hours. Now, an important note is that these metrics exclude major storms. Utility performance during major storms is separately monitored and investigated as necessary. Next slide, please. As I mentioned earlier, an important initiative to facilitate achievement of the state's clean energy goals is transforming the electric transmission and distribution system to allow for the efficient integration of those resources. In that regard, the overarching goal is to integrate those resources in a reliable and cost-effective manner. I'll talk shortly about some of the planning efforts underway to effectively integrate future resources to achieve the CLCPA goals, but first I'll discuss some of the efforts that have been ongoing. Under the state's Reforming the Energy Vision strategy, the concept of non-wires alternatives, or what we call NWAs, was developed. The idea of a non-wires alternative is that there may be alternatives to traditional utility infrastructure investments, like for instance, upgrading a substation, that are more cost effective than those traditional solutions, and therefore the utility should be considering those alternatives. These alternatives could include targeted energy efficiency programs or the use of distributed energy resources such as solar generation. To date, the utilities have identified over 40 NWAs, which are currently being pursued or under consideration. Another important electric system resource in the transformation to a clean energy system is distributed energy resources, or DERs, in particular solar resources. The state has a target of 6,000 megawatts of installed distributed solar resources by 2025. There are currently over 2,400 megawatts of solar installed on the system and approximately another 4,700 megawatts in the queue. I just want to note a couple initiatives that DPS has undertaken to help facilitate interconnection and integration of distributed energy resources. So the department established a staff DER ombudsman. This has been key in facilitating the resolution of disputes between developers and utilities regarding DER interconnections. The department also established 2 multi-stakeholder working groups, which in addition to staff include DER developers and utility representatives. These working groups have successfully resolved both technical and procedural obstacles, which has also helped facilitate interconnection of distributed resources. And then finally, with respect to compensation, distributed energy resources have access to compensation through both retail mechanisms as well as New York ISO markets, which also helps facilitate DER development. Next slide, please. Energy storage is, of course, another important resource that will be key to achieving our clean energy future, particularly as a complement to other intermittent renewable resources. The current storage goal is 1,500 megawatts by 2025 and 3,000 megawatts by 2030. To date, there are approximately 936 megawatts of storage resources that are operational or have been awarded through NYSERDA's storage incentive programs. There are approximately 1,200 additional megawatts in the queue. I mentioned the importance of storage as a complement to renewable resources, but there are also other use cases for storage. These include customer-sided uses, such as behind-the-meter storage for customer bill management and demand response programs. On the distribution side, storage can be a standalone resource, exporting electricity into the distribution system for non-wires alternatives, or can be paired with solar and serve as a community distributed generation, or CDG project. On the bulk system, in addition to firming large-scale intermittent renewables, storage can be a standalone resource, providing combinations of wholesale market services, including energy arbitrage, capacity, spinning reserves, and frequency regulation. Next slide, please. Another consideration as we transition to a carbon-free energy system is the electric system impact related to changing customer load profiles. I think Rich touched on this a little bit earlier. So as we move away from fossil fuels, we look for opportunities for beneficial electrification. Two primary considerations here are electrification of the transportation system and electrification of heating systems. With respect to electric vehicles, or EVs, the PSC has issued an EV make-ready order. This order provides for utility funding of EV charging stations through 2025. The program is sized to meet the New York State zero emissions vehicle goal. And of note, the impact of EVs and EV charging stations on the electric system will need to be an important consideration in planning an investment in the system. And this impact will be very location specific. In other words, it's not just a matter of predicting the total penetration of electric vehicles in the state, but also where specifically the EVs and the EV chargers will be located. With respect to building electrification, the Commission order establishes targets and budgets for heat pumps and provides $454 million in funding to achieve 3.6 trillion BTUs of energy savings. Next slide, please. Now I'll briefly discuss the state's electric system planning efforts underway to prepare the transmission and distribution system for the integration of additional renewable resources. The Accelerated Renewable Energy Growth and Community Benefits Act, enacted in April, has various components, including the establishment of a new renewable energy siting office, but I'm going to discuss the grid planning and investment portion of the act. So the Accelerated Renewables Act directs the Public Service Commission to establish state bulk transmission and local transmission and distribution investment plans to meet the CLCPA goals. It also directs the Department of Public Service staff, along with NYSERDA, NYPA, LIPA, and the New York ISO, to conduct a comprehensive power grid study to identify cost-effective electric system upgrades, which will inform the plan. This study is currently well underway, and the power grid study actually consists of three main components. There's a 100 by 40 study, which focuses primarily on land-based resources and needed bulk transmission investments. There is an offshore wind study, which analyzes the impacts and needed upgrades to achieve the 9 gigawatt offshore wind target, and a utility local T&D study, which will identify utility investments needed to achieve the CLCPA targets. Initial results of the power grid study will be available by the end of this year. In early 2021, the Public Service Commission will identify bulk level and local T&D investments and needs. These bulk projects, I'll just note, may be implemented through the New York ISO process or other mechanisms. The Commission will also establish guidelines for integrating CLCPA goals into utility planning processes. The PSC will revisit the plan and progress toward achieving the CLCPA goals by January 1st, 2023, and every 4 years thereafter. And although the PSC is required to relook at the planning process and progress every 4 years, it can, of course, make adjustments at any time in response to market conditions or other developments. And so in closing, I just want to reiterate something that John Rhodes mentioned earlier, and that is that as we transition to a clean energy future, reliability as well as cost effectiveness are certainly always core considerations, both for the bulk system as well as the non-bulk system. And with that, I want to thank you for the opportunity to present to the Climate Action Council today, and I look forward to answering any questions you may have.
Great, John. We have about 13 minutes left and a few more slides to do after this set, but do you want to manage some questions here?
Doreen, that's for you.
Yes. Well, first, let me please thank Rich and Tammy for the great presentations. And I know Gavin has had his hand up for the entire set. So I say Gavin goes first with a question.
I only did it so I didn't forget. So, first of all, I want to thank Commissioner Sagos and you, Doreen. I've been pushing for this type of study since we started this process, and a number of my colleagues on the council have as well. So thank you for that. I took away a couple things from Rich Dewey's presentation. We have John Rhodes very involved in this as the chair of the PSC, and the role of the PSC is very vital. We don't have a formal role for the ISO. I just would like to state that we need to keep the ISO very close to us at the table as we consider these decisions about how we're going to achieve and arrive at our goals. So I'd like to just keep that request out there that the ISO be constantly vigilant in the decisions and the things that we think about as a council. But what I took away from Rich's study, and it may be more apparent to some of us that are in the energy space on a daily basis, is that renewables in what we have today of wind, solar, storage are not going to get us to where we need to go all alone. We need new technologies. And I guess my question to Rich is, what do we need to do market-wise, because we have low costs, to attract those new technologies to help us get closer to these goals? Because I think folks need to understand that the current mix of renewables is not going to get us there, and dispatchable resources are critically important to maintain reliability. And I just would ask Rich to spend a minute, if he could, just expanding on that question.
Sure. Thanks, Gavin. When you look at the challenges to getting to the, it's really the 2040 goal and that last small percentage of non-renewable resources. So 70% by 2030, we feel pretty comfortable can be achieved by wind, solar, and storage. It's just you just have to have the right kind of investment, and they got to be located in the right spot. But we do not believe we can get to 100% carbon-free electric system without some sort of development of these newer technologies that can be dispatchable, that can be available, and still be carbon-free. We're a big proponent of markets and the efficacy of markets in order to achieve those goals. We've been in addition to providing the right kind of pricing signal so that there's that investment, we think about the risk to ratepayers, and a market approach, whether it's carbon pricing or a mechanism that provides that kind of willingness to have an investor make that risk. You take that risk off of the ratepayers and you put it on the investors. And that's why we think a market approach is the most effective and, at the end of the day, the most cost effective for consumers. So, our approach is carbon pricing, but it's not just carbon pricing. Markets are going to be important, and we're going to have to evolve our markets because the types of resources we're going to need is a little bit different when you start thinking about backstopping the intermittency of the renewables. So you're going to need units that are going to be able to respond quickly, ramp up, ramp down, and really balance the variability of the renewable resources. And the markets are going to need to be evolved to make sure that we prioritize and value the types of resources and incent the kind of performance out of the resources that's most compatible with the wind and the solar, and maximize the capabilities of the renewables. So that's our strategy at the New York ISO to be able to support that.
Thank you, Gavin, and thank you, Rich. These are all topics that are implicit but important to point out, and those that actually several of our panels will be tackling. And I am looking at Basil and knowing we probably only have time for one more question. And with that, I'm looking at the three hands raised, thinking that I think Anne has asked the fewest questions of those three. So I'm going to go with Anne and ask, I'm sorry, Dennis and Peter, we're really tight on time. So Anne?
Thanks, Doreen. My question has to do with the interaction of those two presentations. Rich, very happy of course, to hear you say that you're relatively comfortable knowing it's a challenge, but we could get to 70% by 2030. And then our remaining challenges that is getting all the way to emissions free. Did the slice that you define that needs to be provided by dispatchable carbon-free energy assume just the two transmission projects they're in the permitting process, but that have been approved by the FERC Order 1000 process that was on your slide? Like, if Tammy's grid study results in a lot more transmission investments. Does that solve some of that problem, or do you think that's really the percentage that has to be met by this new innovation of dispatchable carbon-free?
Great question. And that study assumed that the transmission constraint problem was solved, right? So that what's left, as we see it, is that piece that's just going to be necessary to balance the gaps in availability of the renewable resources.
Thanks so much. Probably something I should have known before.
Thank you, Anne, and thank you again, Rich and Tammy, and thank you, Gavin, for your work in making this presentation happen. So with that, if we go to the next slide, I believe I'm turning it back to Commissioner Sagos with his team wrap us up.
Thanks, Doreen. And I'll turn it over to Maureen Letty, our Director of our Climate Office, for some agency updates.
Thanks so much. Can you hear me?
You can.
Oh, great. I'm also, much like Martin's, having a little bit delay on the slides, so I won't be able to see, but I will speak to it. Just wanted to bring to the attention, so the next slide, please, the upcoming items of interest for members of the council. Tammy talked about the electric system planning aspect of the Accelerated Renewables Act. Their DPS and NYSERDA are holding a technical conference tomorrow on transmission planning. This is information gathering that can help inform action on the grid study. Details on how to join that virtual meeting can be found on the DPS website using the case number that's listed on the slide here. Also, as a reminder, the public comment period is open on the DEC emission limit rulemaking. We have virtual hearings scheduled, 2 of them, on the 20th of October, 2 o'clock and 6 o'clock. Details on how to join those virtual hearings can be found on the DEC website. And the comment period will continue until the 27th of this month. We also accept comments in writing, and you can find information on the website on how to submit written comments to that rulemaking. And we are still working on releasing the value of carbon guidance proposal later this month, so keep a lookout for that. And then finally, another aspect of the Accelerated Renewables Act, the Office of Renewable Energy Siting is hosting a series of public hearings on rulemakings to establish the uniform standards and conditions for permitting renewable energy projects. So there's a series of them starting around the middle of November. So more information on those proposals and the hearings can be found on the ORES website listed on this slide. So that's for that, I'll pass it back to you, Commissioner, to finish out the presentation.
Great. Thanks, Maureen. Let's see if I'm on mute. There we are. Next slide, please. I think this is our last slide. Well, second to last. One more. Okay. Just a quick slide on our future CIC meetings. You'll see that we've got 5 of them listed right here. I think this is our 4th meeting right now that we just completed. And we got a lot done today. Certainly a great deal done in the last 30 days, 30, 60 days. So hats off to everybody. If there aren't any further questions or points to be made for the good of the order, I will end this meeting on a good note. Everyone have a great night and be safe. Thank you.
Thank you,
Dory.
Basil.
Hey, Basil.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Bye-bye.